Thank you.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Uh, backwards though. Always goes backwards on me. All right. You can see the full presenter mode, right? I don't really have notes, so it doesn't matter for me, but probably better for everyone else. Cool. So thank you for attending. So I can get this out of my way here. So this talk, Human Intelligence, I created the name based off of the AI craze to try to take advantage of that, and I'll admit it. But today we're talking about motivation and performance, which are key, I would say, components to just about every best practice that we tend to focus on, especially agility. So thank you for joining me. Already kind of had my info on the screen. It's always awkward transitioning to a virtual presentation from a live one, but there's my face again. I am the host of the Agile for Agilists podcast. We have two more episodes already recorded to release to finish season 3. Drew and I started that at the beginning of last year. We've had fantastic guests on, like John Fazaro. We also had John Kern most recently, James Grenning, Esther Derby, Brian Link, lots and lots of great guests. So John Willis says there's no such thing as a shameless plug. It's just a plug. So there was my plug. More about me. I have way too many certifications. People usually joke about that. I promise I'm not a certification chaser. I worked with a lot of trainers at my last company, and so I got to participate in a lot of their practice classes as they were preparing to present it to the public. And so I got just about every scrum.org certification you can get, at least at the time. They're always adding more, as well as some other various industry ones. But as the slide said, I currently work for Ford. My year anniversary was last week. I've been there for a year. I'm in the credit area of Ford, and I am helping them with their, I guess, agile practices and their organization overall, as well as helping them to move more towards a product-led organization. Uh, yeah, I think that's enough about me. If you have questions, always happy to answer and tell more about myself. Let us move forward. So as I mentioned, I had a lot of certifications. Most recently, I got this one. Uh, I am not, I would say this is a new area for me. It's definitely been a passion, but I wanted to make sure that I was representing the information as best as I could. So I went out of my way to get some extra education, and I'll probably continue. I just keep reading and reading on this topic. It started as a personal thing, actually 20 years ago. Some of the things in this class I'd forgotten I'd read. But most recently, I read The Happiness Advantage, which I had seen Sean Akers talk, oh gosh, 10 years ago or more now, which is a fantastic TED Talk. I want to be Sean Aker when I grow up, as far as presenters are concerned. He's very great at it. But it's all about kind of personal journey stuff. And through that, I was able to find the relevance to work, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. Before we go any further, my disclaimer, right? The fun part. I'm not a doctor. I'm on your screen, but I do not play one on TV. This content is for informational purposes only, all that fun stuff. Because I am serious about this, I did have it peer reviewed by a doctor who specializes in neuroscience, Dr. Raquel Garzon, and Dom also from a behavior design, because they talk a little bit about behavior design towards the end. As I mentioned, I work for Ford. These opinions are my opinions. Ford may or may not agree with them, or any other company that I may be associated with. And I always get asked this. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. These are a little bit text heavier slides on purpose so that they're all going to be available for you at the end. So you can download them and go back to them. Cool. Let's get into it. So today we're going to discuss how to improve every outcome in your life. Yes, I sound like a used snake oil salesman, the new term for you. We're going to talk about how we can improve every outcome in an organization, as well as your personal lives and your overall health. And if that sounds like a big promise, it is, but the science is there. And so, how we're going to go about this is we're actually going to try to understand how humans operate. Instead of looking at organizations or work, we're going to look at humans because I think most of us on this call are humans still, predominantly. There may be some AI on there. That's okay. You're welcome to. But we're going to look at the biology, in particular neurobiology, and the psychology behind how humans operate to better understand how they operate at their best. And we're going to start with these things called neurotransmitters. They're also known as the chemical messengers of the brain. And essentially, they're produced when the neurons in our brain, which fire electrical signals, fire, neurotransmitters are created. Most people are familiar with these four: oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. If you're a health major, they are they act as hormones. They're not officially hormones. Sometimes you'll hear them as the feel good hormones. So they're kind of a complicated chemical we're still trying to understand more of. But most of us have kind of heard these terms, right? Oxytocin is the love hormone, endorphins are the body's natural painkillers, dopamine is our reward center, and serotonin is our mood booster. In particular, we're going to talk about dopamine. The dopamine, while it does reward us, it also is responsible for our attention and focus. It activates learning centers of our brain, and it helps us to recall and commit new memories. This sounds pretty important. And then serotonin is the mood booster, but it also helps us with alertness and wakefulness. It's the chemical that wakes us up in the morning. It also helps with our motivation and our willpower, and it helps us to manage our anxiety. So these two chemicals are responsible in our brain for all of these things, and they're really good at it, actually. There's been over 200 scientific studies that have shown that happiness leads to success in just about every domain of your life, like we just talked about. These two chemicals enable us to perform at our best. And then enter stress. I'm sure none of us have any stress on this call. If you're not familiar with stress, it's a response to mental or emotional strain, and it's a prompt to address challenges or threats in our life. And the thing about stress is that stress actually produces this hormone, the steroid hormone called cortisol, which a lot of people I think have heard of today. But what I didn't know until recently is that cortisol actually inhibits our dopamine production. When we're producing cortisol, we're not able to produce dopamine as well. It also increases the consumption of our serotonin. So these two chemicals that we just talked about being super crucial for us to do all the things like learn and pay attention, and they don't work so well when our body's full of cortisol. And high levels of cortisol is actually really bad for us over long periods of time. It leads to weight gain, hypertension, muscle weakness, and it creates what most of us are familiar with called downward spiral, right? Where our mood and our fatigue just seems to get worse and worse. And in fact, stress affects all systems of our body. They say that up to 90% of all doctor visits are stress related ailments and complaints. And I believe it was Dr. Mate also said that he believes emotional stress is a major cause of all physical illness, from cancer to immune conditions and many other chronic diseases. That's not overnight, that's elevated levels of cortisol for extended periods of time. So it's bad news. We also have this cool thing in our brain called neuroplasticity, and it doesn't mean that it's filled with microplastics. It means that it keeps evolving with time. And so our brain physically changes based on the demands we put on it. And so there's a cool study a few years ago in the UK. A taxi driver in UK is much harder job to get than in the US. They have to actually memorize the roads and the streets of London. And so they take a test, they have to pass all that. And what they found was the part of their brain that's responsible for navigation actually was larger than the average person. And they would do before and afters as well. And they would see that it actually grew over this period of trying to become a driver. The thing with cortisol is that it actually causes a part of our brain to grow that deals with stress, the amygdala. And so the, you get better essentially at being stressed the longer you're stressed and the more cortisol you produce, which isn't something that most people want to be better at. And then it also decreases the neuroplasticity, which makes it harder to correct the problem. And neuroplasticity is strongest when we're young, but as we age, it does slow down. However, our brains remain neuroplastic for our entire lives. So it's something that we can adjust, which is really cool because that means you can teach an old dog new tricks. And it's not just, one person, right? When we look at the Gallup polls, half of workers are unsatisfied with their jobs, and 30% find their job stressful. And that's even compounded by 40% of us see their job as central to their identity, myself included, probably to a fault. And a third of US adults have been diagnosed with depression at some point in time. And that means they actually went and got diagnosed at some point. And it doesn't mean they're currently, which means the numbers are probably higher. There's a lot of stress out there. So I'm going to try an activity. I did this live. I've not done it virtually yet. So this is called the day reconstruction activity. So if you can take a second, pull out an Excel spreadsheet, Google Sheets, Notepad, doesn't matter, or a piece of paper. This is something that you can do more in depth later on. But the idea is I want you to track some of the activities you've done today, and then next to it, rate it on a Likert scale. Right? 0 means it didn't make me happy at all. Maybe it made me unhappy. Like me getting up at 6 a.m., which I did not do today, by the way. Uh, Getting up at 6 a.m. makes me very unhappy, whereas drinking a fresh cup of coffee makes me very happy. If any of you follow me, you'll know I'm a little bit of a coffee snob at this point. During the pandemic, I started hand grinding, which is both fantastic and a curse because now I can't drink coffee outside of my house. We're virtual, so I know time tends to feel longer. So I'll give everyone 2 minutes, just kind of talk, give you time to get something out. Give everyone 2 minutes to kind of think about this and jot some stuff down. All right, 2 minutes. You think that'd be the easiest part of my talk, but it's always the hardest for me. Sit there and not talk. Uh, so what are some, if anyone's one to share, uh, are any of them surprising to you, and do you see any trends? Matthew.
Yes, thank you. And this is an interesting activity. I always like getting sort of like a back of the box, just let's do an activity and then find things out because I noticed first off my happiness level was going up as the day progressed. Like the start of work was like a not at all happy, like incredibly stressful, not happy. But then, getting work done was better, and specifically finishing work. And actually I just got back from the gym, just going and working out. I rated that as the highest, which I didn't, I mean, I didn't think about. I guess, I technically released a lot of endorphins working out, but I didn't think about that. It's like, oh, getting done with things actually helps.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing. Did someone else have their hands up? Just feel free to unmute if you did.
Yeah, I noticed. I'm a creature of routine, and I've just like my son just went back to school, and so that kind of tends to put everybody in the house back on a routine, more so than in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I think my happiness at each recurring event of the predictable event of the routine increased. Like, yep, I'm on the rails here.
Interesting. One more. Does one more person want to share? No? All right. That's
I
okay.
can come over.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
DK.
Yeah. So I find when things start becoming mundane, just opposite to John, if things start getting into a schedule or the things become normal, which happens sometimes in my day, that becomes stressful for me. I like something, a new curveball being thrown at me every time, and I get surprised, and that keeps my adrenaline up if something new is there. So
Yeah.
very opposite, right?
Yeah. So I would encourage everyone. I mean, I realize I put you on the spot and I only gave you 2 minutes. Think through this a little bit more and look at like what are the different tasks and activities throughout my workday? What are the, different meetings and how do those make me feel? As well as outside of work. It's a fun activity to see what should I be spending more time doing and what should I be trying to spend less time doing. All right. So, any guesses on what the number one cause of stress at work is? According to John, it's starting, or Matt, starting the day.
Deadlines.
John, it's not having structure. DK, you said doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, deadlines.
Deadlines, people, seen in the chat, unclear expectations,
This year, layoffs.
layoffs. Yeah. Urgent request, lack of agency. John, good to see you.
Bad
Yeah, I
boss.
just want to add.
Well, the answer is a lack of control. All of these things, and that's what research tells us, is a lack of control. All right, so all these things like, a lack of agency, urgent requests, unclear expectations, people maybe, layoffs, right? It's a lack of feeling in control. And they've found through research that it doesn't really matter how difficult the job is, doesn't matter how busy it is. None of these factors truly matter at the end of the day. Whether or not we feel stressed and fatigued is if we felt like we were in control. Yes, Justin, autonomy. Do we have autonomy? And as we started the talk by saying, stress counteracts the chemicals we need to perform at our best, which means we perform at our best when we feel like we have control, when we have autonomy, which is something many of us agilists have been saying for a very long time. I think the first person to really talk about it were the Hawthorne studies from Bell Labs in the 1920s. And it's been a long time that we've been discussing this, and yet we still tend to have very controlling environments. And what I loved about digging into this is it shows that the science backs up the psychology and the other things that we've known for a very long time. And so we had kind of hit some of the ways that a lack of control manifests at work, right? Micromanaging, limited decision-making power, constant oversight from superior or monitoring tools. I know that's a new trend with remote work to implement monitoring tools, and the research is out there just as bad. Super strict processes, mandated deadlines and goals, right? Lack of psychological safety, right? So we are, as I mentioned, biologically wired to perform worse in a command and control environment. Not your fault, right? You can't just focus harder. Stress is something that's personal. If we feel like it's stressing us, it's stressing us. And there's no amount of willing that away. Research has looked at that too. Scientists, a little bit smarter than me, have declared it is not possible. Let's talk about feeling in control then, because that's what we want to promote in our work environment. And when it comes to feeling in control, what we're really talking about is what motivates us, right? Because am I motivated to do the work or am I not motivated to do the work? I feel in control when I'm the one that's motivated to do the work. And there's two types of motivations. There's called controlled motivation, which is extrinsic. So I expect to receive a reward or a punishment if I do this. And there's autonomous motivation or intrinsic. And this is whether or not I feel in control again. And so it relates to it, competence and connection. Edward Deci and Dr. Ryan identified this first. You may have heard it from Dan Pink as autonomy, mastery, purpose. The same thing. But the original research, Dan says purpose. The original research showed relatedness or connection. I added it as 3 C's here. I guess could be purpose, but I feel like there's a disconnect there. So connection is what I go with. And autonomous is better than controlled when it comes to individual motivators. Right? In fact, intrinsically motivated employees are 3 times more engaged. And positive extrinsic or controlled motivators lose effectiveness and can diminish with time. And negative extrinsic motivators create stress, leading to the cortisol production that we're trying to avoid. And then, when we look at whether or not someone has autonomy, we tend to say like, well, you're empowered, right? Your teams are empowered. And you walk away, well, you can't just say someone's empowered. It doesn't work. In order to be empowered or to have autonomy, you need both ability and authority. And this is something that a lot of organizations I see missing. And so the ability is across multiple facets. Do I have the ability to self-manage myself? Do I have the knowledge required to accomplish this thing? And do I have the resources to do that? Meaning, I want John to program me an app. Have I given him a laptop to program on? Or am I expecting him to come up with it, out of thin air? Right? Do you have the tools and the things you need? And then the second is authority. Do you actually have the authority to make decisions? I can tell you you're empowered, but if I don't give you the authority, like, and you get your hand slapped every single time, man, that's not autonomy. And in order to provide someone with authority, they need guardrails, they need expectations, and we need that thing called psychological safety. I want to touch on competence a little bit as well, as part of the intrinsic motivators. So Peter Senge, who has written the driest and coolest book ever, has said that organizations learn only through individuals who learn, which I also feel like sometimes we forget that every company, every organization is made of people, right? That's how they do anything is people. So if you want them to learn, people need to learn. Growth is also a natural human need. We need to grow to feel fulfilled. And back to that neuroplasticity, right? The more our brain learns, the better we get at learning. And actually, if we continuously learn, it promotes our brain health long throughout our life. And then there's this thing called neurobics, which is pretty fascinating. It's stepping out of your comfort zone and breaking your usual habits to exercise your brain. And so our brains are really efficient and we develop habits and we get really comfortable in those habits. And it allows us to basically act on autopilot in some ways. And so if we really want to exercise our brain, we can't just run in autopilot. And so there's all these different things you can do. But one of them is just doing something slightly bizarre, like brushing your teeth with the opposite hand that you normally use. And then there's all sorts of tricks like brain hacks you can do as well if it's like reciting a mantra or trying to memorize something at the same time, because it's activating your brain in a different way, or actually, right, activating your brain. And then strengths-based development boosts employee productivity, right, up to 18%. So focusing on the things you're good at and the things you enjoy. And I love mastery because we all embody mastery in some way in work or outside of work. I keep picking on John because he's on camera and he's the first person there. And I know John well, but he's got all those guitars behind him. And last I knew, John, you were not a professional musician who makes a living by playing guitar,
Not
but you
yet.
still enjoy it, right?
Every day.
Yeah. And so that is you demonstrating, competence or mastery in your personal life because you want to. You're motivated by that. And then we discussed connectedness or relatedness. Um, Social support is the key predictor of happiness in life and life expectancy. And it's the number one thing when we look at is someone happy, and when we do research where we see like people that live the longest, the number one factor is their social support. And America actually has, if you haven't seen the news, an epidemic of loneliness. That is a concern. And back to the neurobiology, interacting with others reduces pain, anxiety, and stress while boosting your mood through oxytocin. We haven't talked a lot about oxytocin yet. It's the painkiller, the body's natural painkiller. A lot of the receptors that produce it are the same ones that produce serotonin, so it actually gives you a similar effect. And then employees with workplace friends are more engaged, right? Productive, reliable, innovative, and collaborative. Collective intelligence, time and again, has been shown to be the biggest indicator of performance. Right, and then, yeah. So those are all things as far as motivating intrinsically and at work, but we're talking about happiness, and so I'm not going to leave you hanging on just work stuff. I will give you some personal stuff as well. So first and foremost, there are known ways to promote happiness. Right? We know how to do this now. But there is no one thing. Can't just give you this one pill. I said I was a used snake oil salesman. Not quite. It's a whole kit of snake oils you need to buy. The idea is we want to do a bunch of little things that promote happiness and make them habits. And we create what Dr. Korb calls the upward spiral. We always talk about a downward spiral. We need to inverse that by creating an upward spiral. You can't just do the one thing. And just like our motivation, happiness in our personal lives is also predominantly intrinsic. Right? Only 10% of long-term happiness can be predicted by external factors. And so I spent years trying to get my manager position, trying to hit my certain salary, get my degree, get good grades, buy my house with a picket fence, drive a Cadillac, all those things, which most actually are true. I've accomplished most of those things, and yet they don't really equal happiness. Right? In fact, usually they make us less happy because we achieve the thing and we're like, why am I not happy now? I should be happy. And it has the reverse effect. And so Sean Aker calls it in the happiness advantage. He says we have the equation reversed. The idea is if we're happy, we'll get all the things. But we're taught by our parents and our schools and our managers the other way around. So in order to do that, one of the things that we want to do is we want to take advantage of this thing in our brain called the reticular activating system, the RAS. Okay? And so the RAS has a really important job. It filters out 99% of our surroundings. Otherwise, we would just go insane, right? Because we have all these senses all around us at any given time. And we've actually trained it to identify what is important enough to catch our attention. Right now, I've trained it that presenting is important enough to stay engaged in my talk and not, pay attention to the dogs outside or whatever. It's also why you can be in a crowded room and someone yells your name and you'll hear them, even though it's just as, everyone else is talking just as loud. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we can't will ourselves to, be happy, but we can train our minds to pay attention to the things that make us happy. One way that you can retrain it is by documenting things you're grateful for. Gratitude is something that's coming up more and more and more in happiness. And the thing is that we all have things that we're grateful for in our lives, but we don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about them. We tend to think about the more immediate frustrations. And so the idea is, how do we train ourselves to look for the things that we're grateful for that are already there? And then, we'll be busy doing that and we'll be spending less time thinking and looking at the things that we're frustrated with. And then the other thing is meditation. Meditation reduces stress, and research has shown that it can actually restructure our brains in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. There's some cool research out there of people who have meditated for 30 minutes a day, and then their amygdala after 6 to 8 weeks in an MRI had actually shrunk. And I always forget the other part, the part that's responsible for managing our emotions, something cortex, not prefrontal. It actually was bigger as well. And yes, levitation takes a bit longer to achieve, but I'm confident you can get there someday. You just have to teach me, John. The other thing you can do throughout the day is you can take a break. So this is actually something from a couple of years ago that Microsoft's Human Factors Lab did, which is really cool. They hooked up an EEG cap to people's brains and they made them work and then saw the reaction. And if they were using a Microsoft product, it was super red, like the top. No, I'm just kidding. What they found was that when you didn't take breaks, the stress compounded over time throughout the day. And so it's funny that, Matt, you said you felt happier as the day went on. Maybe that means you took a lot of breaks. I don't know. But a lot of people don't. And so when you're in back-to-back-to-back meetings, you feel stressed. Yeah, you're right. It stresses you out. It compounds. Whereas on the bottom here, when you take breaks, we're able to actually maintain an even level. And so the idea here is, right, how do you introduce breaks throughout your day? Now, in their study, they did a meditation every time just to have like a control factor where everyone was doing the same thing. But not saying you have to meditate during that time. You can do other things as well. But it would give you time to retrain your RAS. And then the two largest predictors, right? We already talked about the one, which is interacting with others or your social support network. So as I mentioned, oxytocin is the same receptor as serotonin. It reduces pain and stress. And oxytocin actually activates the parts of your brain responsible for social interactions. So the more you socialize, the better you get at it in the moment and over time. And also, if you're familiar with the Blue Circles, there's a great documentary on Netflix about the book. It's actually the #1 factor for life expectancy of people who have lived over 100. And as I mentioned earlier, even in a work setting, having friends at work makes a huge, huge difference. And so it's really important to have psychological safety to be yourself and to network with people. I am from West Michigan early on, and I would say if you're familiar with West Michigan, it's a little bit more conservative. And there were things that I didn't necessarily identify with that others did. You know, like I was a really big gamer, for example. And I was taught my whole life, like, gaming's a waste of your time. Don't do it. I was even a pro gamer before they made big salaries. So wrong place, wrong time, I guess. But all of these things I hid from people at work because I didn't want them to view me as not professional. And so I still think I was effective at my job, and people liked working with me in the moment because I did a good job, but they didn't want to hang out with me outside of work. They didn't really want to connect with me anything more than just an exchange, because that's how I showed up. And so it's really important to show up as yourself and to have an environment that supports people so that you can actually build those friends and be more productive at work. It all feeds into each other. And then the other largest predictor is exercise. If you work remote and in IT, like me, you don't get nearly enough of that. Sedentary behaviors increase all-cause mortality by up to 30%. I always see the thing like, you know, sitting's the new smoking, and that's originally what I had here. But remember, I said it was peer-reviewed, and Dr. Raquel's like, yeah, don't say that. Smoking is smoking. So it's not as bad as smoking, but it is bad for you. And it increases all of our mortality rates. And some research, again, this is informational. Don't take it like I'm your doctor, talk to your doctor, but regular exercise can be as effective as medication for treating depression. It's really powerful. And I think it was Matt mentioned the endorphins, right? But it also produces oxytocin. It also produces serotonin. It also produces dopamine, produces all four. And then, what's that fingering? If you take the opportunity to step outside, you get sunlight. Sunlight actually tells your body to produce serotonin. So it's really important in the middle of the day, especially for your circadian rhythm, to get sunlight, because melatonin comes from serotonin. Serotonin is a building block for melatonin. Melatonin helps you go to sleep at night. If you're not getting enough serotonin, you're not getting enough melatonin, and you're not going to sleep well. Really important. And then there's all sorts of research too about getting outside around nature. You know, so many hours a week is good for mental health and all that stuff. So exercise is really great. In the blue circle for longevity, he says that you need to walk 2 hours a day, which is a lot, or garden for an hour. So I've never been a yard work person, but I think gardening is probably in my future because I can fit an hour of gardening in before 2 hours walking. But in general, just increasing your mobility, designing your day to get up, go to the kitchen, walk up and downstairs, whatever it is, helps drastically. I actually bought a Fitbit after my first year of the pandemic. So I was like, I wonder how many steps I'm getting. And it was like 200 at the end of the day. Whereas I was walking miles every day going in the office. All right, but changing habits is hard, right? Just having the information isn't enough. Otherwise, nobody would smoke. Well, let's take advantage of that brain again and neuroscience. And so one of the ways that we can promote whatever change it is, whether it's going out and meeting people or exercise or whatever habit in your life you want to change, we want to take advantage of dopamine, right? We want to celebrate everything we do that is desirable by giving yourself a dopamine hit. That can be giving yourself a high five in the mirror, it can be doing a dance, it can be smiling at yourself. If those work for you, if they're too hokey, then find something else. You know, James Clear says if you're going to have, you know, that Oreo either way, stop beating yourself up about the Oreo. Walk up and down the stairs one time and give it to yourself as a reward. Right. And that's because a behavior becomes more automatic when you feel a positive emotion or relief from a negative one. And so beating yourself up about not going to the gym enough, or I don't know, not picking up enough, or whatever your nag is of yourself, is actually making it harder for you to adopt that new habit. And it's introducing stress, which is going to make it even harder for you because you're shutting down the learning centers of your brain. And then don't get caught up in perfecting the new change. And I will talk from my experience, but I believe many have the same thing where it's like every New Year's, you're like, I'm going to start working out more. And in order to work out more, I'm going to watch all of the videos on YouTube, and I'm going to create the most effective plan. And Mondays are going to be, arms and chest, and Wednesdays are going to be legs. Fridays are going to be back. And I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then I'm going to change my diet. And I'm creating this Herculean mountain that I'm trying to overcome that I beat myself up with when I don't hit that. Whereas if I just went and picked up a weight and curled it one time and put it back down, I've made progress. Right? So progress over perfection. And make it small. That's something that BJ Fogg and James Clear both talk about a lot is, if it's small, like I'm going to do one push up, right? You're decreasing the time that it takes to give yourself that dopamine hit of done, I did it. It also reduces the effort. So if you want to journal your gratitudes, one thing that you can do is put your journal next to your bed, right? Because now you're not laying in bed going, oh, I forgot to do that, and I don't even know where my journal is. And you set it next to your bed. It's a cue for you to do it. It's a prompt, as BJ Fogg calls it, and it's already there. All right. So to summarize, our brains are biologically wired to perform at our best when we're motivated intrinsically. Right? The feel-good hormones are responsible for the brain's performance. The stress hormone shuts down the feel-good hormones, and the number one cause of stress at work is a lack of control. Really important. Send this to your managers when we're done and say, "Hey, you're the number one cause of my stress." No, don't say it that way. Uh, And as I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is just a start. There's tons and tons of information out there. I'm reading a book by his name's Mike Viking, which is like the coolest name ever. The Scandinavian guy that started like the first Happiness Institute or Positive Psychology Institute. But there's so many books. Definitely glad to share as I go through them. For this one, I already mentioned the happiness advantage was really what kind of got me started on all of this. And to the point where I gave like a book report type talk at work, which I do. I always like to bring different things in. But I was talking about at work, and people were like, hey, you should do a presentation and share it. And they liked it. And then my friend was like, hey, my wife works at the local hospital and does these sorts of things for doctors all the time. Would you do that? And all I had was the happiness advantage. I didn't have all of this other science behind it. And I went there and they kind of crapped all over me like, hey, there's not enough research here and this and that. And so it was a really great experience. But the thing is that the Upward Spiral by Alex Korb is where I got all of like the brain biology from. And he goes way, way in depth in the weeds, saying different parts of the brain that I can't remember because he actually does this for a living and he's a doctor. But if you want to understand where a lot of that stuff comes from, it's a really, really great book. And then the habits, I touched on it very, very briefly. Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg is a great book. There's also the Tiny Habits Academy.
My biggest concern, investments on AI to make machines smarter. There's no limit to the amount of money that's been pumped into it. The investment in HI to make humans smarter, human intelligence, that's just sad. It's sad that we're going to live in a world right around the corner where machines will be more articulate, analytical, critical thinking, banter ability, contextual, deep understanding, while we have resorted to short tweets, emojis, memes, and stickers to communicate.
I hope the audio played through to everyone and I wasn't just staring at the screen randomly, awkwardly. Yeah, all right, great. Yeah, so I get all of my sage advice from Will I Am. I saw this when I was building this talk and it inspired me to name it to call it human intelligence. And he's got an AI company, which is why he's being interviewed. And I just thought that was really, really powerful. So it's my parting thought for you with all of this information that I'm sure most of it you haven't heard before and you haven't heard talked about in your organizations. But I bet every one of your companies is talking about AI right now. Thank you. So add me on LinkedIn. I think the information is there. You can scan your screen for that, or you can get the slides, these very exact slides by the QR code or going to guac/hi. It's a short URL that I have. And then Dr. Raquel, who reviewed this for me, liked it so much that she said, if you're interested in any of her programs for speaking around this, just say my name, you get 20% off. That is it. We are right a minute before 7. So any questions?
Great talk.
Thank
It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.